The Wizard's Laboratory of Things. Chapter 3. The experiment we decided not to turn on. Ultra-terrestrials, time cops, black boxes, old instruments, and the scientific value of knowing when not to push the button. The wizard was still sitting aboard the sailboat. This was dangerous. Not physically dangerous necessarily, but whenever the wizard became very quiet for more than about 15 minutes, there was an excellent chance that somewhere in his imagination, several unrelated branches of science were about to become acquainted. Tonight, he had been listening to a discussion about ultra-terrestrials. It was one of those wonderfully slippery words. Extraterrestrials supposedly came from somewhere beyond Earth. Inner Earth beings supposedly came from somewhere beneath it. Interdimensional beings supposedly came from somewhere that required considerably more mathematics. Then there were stories of ant people, underground civilizations, ancient protectors, visitors, spirits, watchers, time travelers, and assorted entities that humanity had described under different names for thousands of years. Some traditions treated such beings spiritually. Others treated them as mythology. Modern storytellers sometimes interpreted them technologically. The wizard wasn't prepared to declare which explanation, if any, was correct. But he was willing to ask questions. That was considerably safer. And then he remembered the garage. "Oh dear," said the wizard, because some of the equipment now being assembled along the space-age wall had originally been collected for a considerably stranger experiment. The black box. Years earlier, the wizard had wondered whether an unusual collection of electromagnetic, radio frequency, sensing, computing, and analog laboratory equipment might be combined into an experimental system for investigating things normally discussed under headings such as quantum communication, unusual signal propagation, consciousness experiments, anomalous electromagnetic effects, and perhaps even time. It had been partly engineering, partly speculation, partly curiosity, and partly what the wizard technically classified as a brain fart. Every inventor has them. Most disappear harmlessly. A few become patents. Some become companies. And occasionally, one leaves enough laboratory equipment behind to occupy half a garage. The original idea had possessed something of the flavor of the machinery in contact. Instruments, signals, fields, frequencies, synchronization, computers, sensors, and the tantalizing possibility that perhaps some combination of known technologies could reveal something unexpected. There was only one small problem. The wizard had absolutely no proof that it would work. That normally wouldn't stop an experiment. But then something peculiar happened. Someone claiming knowledge of events around 2028 warned him against operating the proposed device. Whether that warning represented something genuinely anomalous, misunderstand, imagination, coincidence, role-playing, or something else entirely was impossible to establish. The wizard therefore filed the matter under has. Interesting, but unverified. This was an extremely useful filing cabinet. It was considerably larger than the filing cabinet labeled "That's proven." The time cops. Still, the wizard couldn't resist imagining the possibilities. Suppose time travel really existed. Surely somebody would eventually regulate it. You couldn't have tourists wandering into 1863 and accidentally giving Abraham Lincoln a smartphone. There would have to be rules, permits, inspections, possibly parking regulations. And therefore, the wizard invented another department, the Temporal Traffic Authority. Its officers were informally known as the Time Cops. The wizard imagined two exhausted temporal enforcement officers sitting somewhere in 2028, watching a warning light suddenly illuminate. Unauthorized temporal experiment detected. Georgia, garage. One officer would stare at the screen. Is it him again? Yep. What's he building? We don't know. Does he know? Probably not. That's worse. Then somebody would have to travel backward through time and leave a message. Robert, please do not turn that thing on. The wizard laughed. It made a wonderful story. But there was also a serious principle underneath the joke. Knowing when not to energize something. Science isn't merely knowing how to conduct experiments. It is knowing when an experiment has not yet earned the right to be conducted. If a device involves substantial electromagnetic fields, radio frequency energy, high voltage, powerful magnets, lasers, radiation sources, rotating machinery, pressure, vacuum systems, or other significant energies, then imagination must eventually surrender the controls to engineering discipline. Before energizing anything unusual, one asks ordinary questions. What energy is being produced? At what voltage? At what current? At what frequency? At what field strength? Where does that energy go? What could interfere with nearby electronics? What could affect communications? What could overheat? What could arc? What could move unexpectedly? What could injure somebody? And what happens when the wizard has misunderstood his own machine? The last question was particularly important. Opening an interdimensional portal remained hypothetical. Starting an electrical fire remained distressingly conventional. So the original mysterious machine would remain dismantled. The universe could relax. So could the neighbors. But the instruments remained, and here the wizard suddenly realized something important. The experiment might have been speculative. The instruments weren't. A frequency counter was still a frequency counter. A spectrum analyzer could still analyze signals. An oscilloscope could still display waveforms. A signal generator could still produce controlled signals. A power supply could still provide controlled electrical power. Meters could measure. Receivers could receive. Amplifiers could amplify. Antennas could detect electromagnetic energy. Computers could record data. Sensors could observe changes in the environment. Each component could therefore be separated from the extraordinary hypothesis that originally brought it into the collection. That transformed the whole garage. Instead of building a time machine, the wizard could build a serious experimental instrumentation laboratory capable of investigating claims about unusual phenomena. That was scientifically much more interesting. The question would no longer be, can we open a portal? It would become, can we measure anything unusual? Those were profoundly different questions. The first assumed something existed. The second merely looked. The analog advantage, and this was where the old equipment became particularly interesting. Much of it was analog. Knobs, needles, cathode ray displays, transformers, coils, variable capacitors, meters, discrete circuits, heavy metal cases built during an era when laboratory instruments occasionally seemed designed to survive being dropped from an aircraft. Modern digital instruments were extraordinary, but older analog equipment offered something educationally valuable. You could often follow the signal: input, amplification, filtering, oscillation, modulation, detection, output. The wizard could therefore use the space-age wall not merely as scenery, but as a working history of electronic measurement. Some instruments might indeed have collector value as surviving examples become scarcer. Others might have little monetary value, but tremendous practical value. And some enormous, impressive-looking instrument that originally cost a fortune might now be worth approximately $17, because nobody had the proprietary cable required to operate it. That was why every item would eventually need individual research. Age alone did not guarantee increasing value. Rarity plus condition plus usefulness plus calibration plus documentation plus collector demand determined whether an old instrument was treasure or merely very sophisticated ballast. The wizard considered this an important discovery, especially aboard a sailboat. A different kind of contact project. The old black box experiment could therefore be reborn. But this time, it would have rules. The wizard wrote them mentally. Rule 1. Measure before explaining. Hasta. Rule 2. Record before interpreting. Hasta. Rule 3. Attempt ordinary explanations before extraordinary ones. Halt. Rule 4. Never increase energy merely because nothing interesting happened. Halk. Rule 5. Never construct an experiment whose hazards have not been understood. Haas. Rule 6. A mysterious signal is not automatically a message. It could be a switching power supply, a radio transmitter, a motor, lightning, a satellite, a neighbor's electronics, the laboratory itself, or something nobody had identified yet. And not identified yet was a perfectly respectable scientific answer. Perhaps someday the laboratory of things would detect something genuinely strange. Wonderful! Then they would measure it again, and invite somebody else to measure it. The wizard smiled. That was how mysteries became discoveries. The archaeology continues. Tomorrow, the garage excavation would resume. But now the wizard had another classification for the inventory. Every recovered instrument could receive not merely a name and price, but a capability classification. Power. Signal generation. Signal measurement. Aria. Amp. Communications. Audio. Optics. Magnetics. Environmental sensing. Computing. Robotics. Mechanical. Fabrication. Video. Gate. Amp. Demonstration. Historical. Collectible. And perhaps, tucked quietly at the bottom, black box experimentation. That category would remain. Not because the wizard knew that portals, time travelers, ultra-terrestrials, or interdimensional visitors existed, but because civilization had advanced repeatedly when somebody was willing to investigate something that initially sounded ridiculous. The trick was preserving curiosity without abandoning skepticism, wonder without gullibility, imagination without recklessness. Hint. The last entry of the evening, the wizard looked across the dark water. Somewhere beyond the horizon stood the little garage. Inside it were perhaps 500 square feet of possibilities. Robotics, communications, spacecraft experiments, electronics, artificial intelligence, prototype construction, educational videos, old instruments, new instruments, and mysteries. The wizard mentally opened the laboratory gripe sheet again. Possible time machine components discovered in garage. Separated into useful laboratory instruments. Did not open portal. Hopefully unnecessary. Still present. Still present. Appears normal. The wizard closed the imaginary clipboard. Above the sailboat, the stars continued exactly as before. At least, as far as the instruments had measured. Global Robotics Corporation, Robert Colee.